Are you thinking about selling your investment property? Have you wondered, are leases still giving you the protection these days now that there's all the extra legislation? Maybe you've heard that AI and inspection managers are taking over property management. Well, in today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, I'm sitting down with Leanne Jopson, Director of Property Management at Metropole, and we're going to answer, or she's going to answer, 5 of the most common questions investors ask her and her team. Now, even if you're not an investor yet, but you're thinking of getting into property investment, today's show is going to be useful for you because Leanne and her team speak with hundreds of investors every week. And apparently the same questions keep cropping up. So today we're going to unpack those questions and provide you with answers straight from the front line of property management. So again, whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, I think you're going to find today's discussion could save you money, stress, maybe even some sleepless nights. So let's get the answers every property investor needs.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Leanne, thanks for joining me again. Now, I know you're busy running one of the largest property management teams in Australia, but before we get into the investor frequently asked questions that I want to discuss with you today, what's one of the biggest shifts you've noticed in property management recently?
I think we've moved past that everybody's scared, the great unknown when it comes to all of the minimum standards and the new legislation. It's out.
Yes.
We've been dealing with it. We've learnt to play by those rules. There's still a few technicalities there to go, but everybody's kind of settled down and is going back to the fundamentals and the basics. And, interest rates have gone down and calmed down. So there's a real return to, okay, let's get on with it.
Well, I'd like to go through with you let's start with 5 of the common questions property investors keep asking their property managers and asking you and your team. And I think one of the biggest ones that we've seen, but the industry discusses all the time, is should I sell my investment property? We know a lot of investors are selling up, and there are fewer in Victoria, in particular in Melbourne, and you can see it with the number of rental bonds that are being held. More investors are leaving the market than are coming into the market. Well, what do you say when they ask, hey, I'm thinking of selling my investment?
I think the first thing and the most important thing is to ask why.
Yeah.
And so often people are going, oh, I'm just very frustrated with this tenant, or I'm very worried about this situation, or what if I have to spend more money to bring my property up to standard? But if that's your why, then crunch some numbers on it and think, because there's a lots of alternatives that are far less costly than actually selling your property. And why is it? Do we need to look at a new management structure? Do we need to look at what your plans are for that property? What is it that we need to take away? And I guess there is also, we've got 2 different scenarios happening. We've got, some people that are really struggling and feel that they need to sell their property to maintain the school fees and the cost of living and all of that kind of thing. We've also got the people that have gone, wow, look at how much that property has grown. I'm going to cash out now and take a benefit of it.
That's a really good point, Leanne, because it varies from state to state. So I know my sister is very frustrated with some of her investment properties in Melbourne because they haven't gone up much over the last couple of years. So a question I would always ask people is, why did you buy it in the first place? Because don't make a multi-year decision based on the last couple of months of bad news. We know, as you said a moment ago, interest rates are falling, and right around Australia, property values have increased now for the 8th month in a row, and in some states grown significantly. So why you're selling is number one, but why did you buy it in the first place? Go back to the original reason. There's no doubt that some people are still doing it tough financially, and they're frustrated, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think that's why before you make, those 30-year decisions based on the last 3 years or 30 seconds, depending on which way you spin
Yes.
that sentence, I think that what you really need to do is get some independent, unemotional advice. And you can certainly do that through our strategic wealth department here at Metropole and get that advice and do it. But if you do get to the point where you've had that advice, you've crunched the numbers, and you've actually made that decision that you need to sell, come and see our vendor advocacy team and get some help actually selling. But just make sure, more than anything, you're aware of what's going to happen to you in terms of costs of selling and what's going to happen to you in regard to taxes, because people forget about that. They think, oh yeah, got to pay the real estate, got to pay the advertising, but they forget about the tax implications.
Capital gains tax. But the other thing is, what are you going to do with the money once you have sold it? Sometimes you have a higher and better use. It depends where you are in the stage of your journey. Maybe it's the time now to sell up and convert some things to cash, producing assets like shares or ETFs. But I guess you've got to ask the right people for the advice, because if you ask the local estate agent, and I know that's what a lot of people do, because they get those things in their letterbox, or people knock on the doors, or they see an auction down the road and they ask the agent, should I sell? What's the selling agent going to say, Leanne?
Yes. It's always a good time to sell. If you've got a property to sell, for a real estate agent, it's always a great time to sell, because it's always a great time for them to earn commission.
Don't ask a hairdresser or a barber if you need a haircut.
Haircut. Exactly. And that is time, tried and true as we go through. But also the other question, we've talked about, why did you buy the property in the first place? Why is it that you're wanting to sell it? But the other thing is, are you planning on getting back into the market? Because we've all seen the statistics. We know that, yes, Melbourne is lagging behind, but we all know that every predictor and market indicator that's there is it's about to surge ahead. Are you going to sell and then not be able to get back in?
Get in at a higher price.
Yeah, a lesser property at a higher price. Now, that'll still work for you, but you may have lost that momentum that you had in the first place.
Sure. So there are options, as you said, refinancing, drawing equity, and that's what the wealth strategists at Metropole do, using sophisticated software. And by doing that, it takes the emotion out, because a lot of people understandably get emotional and get frustrated and annoyed by government interference. But those who stay in the game, property is very forgiving and has created more multimillionaires than any other asset class in Australia. Now, a moment ago, you mentioned vendor advocacy. A lot of people know that we're much more than a buyer's agent. We actually help our clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. But we do have vendor advocacy as well, which is a no extra cost service that the team at Metropole offer, because the cheapest selling agent isn't the one with the lowest commission. It's the one who gets you the highest price. And we know the agents in many of the areas where we specialize in, because we know who we'd like to buy from, who we don't, who represents their vendors properly. So if you are thinking of selling, don't sign up with a selling agent straight away, because explore your options first. And I'll leave a link in the show notes to Metropole, and why not ask our advice?
If nothing else, Michael,
Yes.
just as you were saying before, I'm a real estate agent, so I'm bagging myself when I say this, but we do have a tendency of selling the good side of selling, giving the best possible market response and an appraisal, and we'll give ranges and that kind of thing to get the result that we think we're going to need to get the listing. So if Joe Blow down the road says it's worth 1.7, we'll say it's worth 1.7.5 to get the listing.
Yes.
So I think one of the other things is, whilst we have vendor advocacy, we don't actually sell property. And as a result, the appraisals that our team will give you are reflective of that. We want you to make the right decision. So we'll give you a realistic appraisal, and then you can base your decision on that, not a pipe dream.
That's a really good point, because when I was dealing with clients, I used to say to them, do you want what the agent thinks it's worth, or do you want the truth? And I think deep down, most people know that agents buy the listing. That's the term used in the industry, by quoting high, and then over time conditioning their vendors to, hey, the market doesn't think the property is worth as much as I thought it was. So yes, there's a lot of emotion. I guess, like in many things in property, just get the right advice. One of the other questions I know people are asking is, with all the reforms, all the regulations, and the conditions that are with leases, are leases still worth entering into, or do I just keep a periodic tenancy? Do they actually add value, or if I lock myself into a lease, is it restricting me more, Leanne?
So the answer to that is that a lease isn't worth as much as it once was. But what it does do is provide that framework, particularly in the initial tenancy. Now, does it gives you some sense of security around the rental expectations, but most leases are 12 months in duration. And of course, now in just about every state and territory in Australia, you can only increase the rent once every 12 months. So realistically, all a lease agreement does right now is assure a tenant that you're not going to give them notice to vacate in the next 12 months. They are assured that you're going to keep them there for the 12 months. They can, however, break a fixed term lease agreement far more readily and easily and less costly as it has been in the past, which is why on the landlord side, it might be, is it even worth having a lease? But the interesting thing is that when we're having those discussions about renewals, any tenant that wants a lease is really wanting that security and unlikely to break it. They're wanting that security. Now, as you know, when we're selecting our investment properties, we are looking for good schools, catchment zones, all of that kind of thing. So it's actually very important for a lot of long-term tenants in particular to have that fixed term tenancy, because they want the security of ensuring that their children are going to be able to stay on at the school and not going to be moving mid-year.
It's more than that, though, Leanne, because people know that the rental market's very tight, and so most tenants do want to stay. I guess it depends upon the location. It depends upon the demographics of the tenant. And you did clearly point out that as part of our strategic plans, we actually look at those areas more carefully. What's the average length of tenancy at Metropole? Have you done any looking at that?
Yeah, we have. So Metropole, I used to say, is just under 3 years. That was my catch cry. The average length of tenancy now, it's well over an average tenancy of 3 years. And that's quite significant when you're looking
How do you
at.
achieve that, and how does that compare to industry averages?
So that's about double the industry average. It does change from state to state and whether you're regional or in thing, but we've just actually had some statistics that say that at the moment, the average person leases for 5 years of their life. And when you consider that some of our properties have leased well in excess of that, that's where you get those long-term tenancies. There's a couple of things. First of all, we're known, Metropole is known for working for investors and therefore having the ability to offer long-term tenancies. We also have a tenant selection criteria that does forward think, is this tenant going to be able to afford this rent at the next level that we think it's going to go to? So they won't move out chasing the cheapest. Are they in a profession or do they have job security that's going to see their income grow? And as a result, we get longer term tenancies. We specifically look for that.
Interestingly, tenants don't always rent because they can't afford to buy or because they're poor. It's often the stage of their life they're at. And as you say, we're looking for tenants who can not just afford today's rent, but are going to be able to keep paying your rent. If you think about it, your future income is going to be dependent upon your tenant's ability to keep paying higher rent. And a lot of that has to do with the location and the demographics. And that's one of the reasons we like gentrifying suburbs, where it's not just the locals who've got good income, but people moving into the area, ones who are more affluent. And we avoid areas, it's not a judge of people, but we avoid areas where tenants are a week or two away from broke. That's only asking for trouble, Leanne.
I think that's the important thing. We've seen lots of changes and we've got more to come with the standardisation of applications. But that's where you really need to know the story, to actually not rely on just AI and computers to do your reference checking and know why the tenant is looking to move and what their plans are, because that helps you select the right tenant.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing from you is that a lease today is more of a framework than a guarantee that the tenant's going to remain there. But I know where possible, always renew my leases with my tenants, gives them security and stability, and it gives me security and stability as well. Now, can't get away from hearing about artificial intelligence. And I've recently written a blog about why a lot of buyers agents are using artificial intelligence to choose locations, but that's just leading to averageness because they're all going into the same areas. What about artificial intelligence in property management? Is there a risk that robots are going to take over? And I'm
Yes.
saying robots tongue in cheek, of course.
Look, I'm loving the advances that we've got in AI in property management. And I think if you honestly asked, if you did a survey of property managers, I'd say 90% of them would say this is wonderful, because what it is doing is taking out a lot of the routine and repetitive tasks. It's helping us, once upon a time it was entering the data, do a mail merge, send out the letters. It's enabling us to spend the time customizing things and reacting to things, arrears, reminders, notices, all of those kinds of things. It's incredibly helpful for.
Mhm.
We've looked for years now, we've used our 360 reports. Now we've got that whole idea that it can read the
Sorry, let
report.
me explain what that is, or you can explain because most people don't know. What do you mean by a 360 report?
So for a number of years now, we've been using at Metropole, we've been using 360 cameras, which literally take a 360 view of a room, and you move the camera throughout out the property to do that. So it's literally, as you can move the pointer around, taking pictures of the floors, the walls, the roof.
So when you, as a client of Metropole, receive your inspection report, you can do a virtual walkthrough, but it's actually a 360-degree walkthrough, so you're just not looking straight ahead. You can look in all directions. Now, if you're wanting to understand how the team at Metropole Property Management can help you, I'll leave a link in the show notes for Leanne's team so that you can have a chat with Leanne and the team about how you could use the same property managers I do to look after your investment properties. Sorry I interrupted you, but this 360 degrees, you and I know what it means, but many people wouldn't, because it's an extra expense we go to do it. But boy, it's given good feedback from our clients and they see a point of difference.
It has, but it's also a classic example of where AI will help us improve, because when you take those 360 photos, AI will now come in and read the photo, for want of a better term, and be able to say, hey, the walls are beige and there's a whirlpool oven or whatever the case may be, and read those details and pre-fill some of that information. But what the camera and what AI can't do is go and open the dishwasher so that you can see inside the dishwasher. It can't open the cupboards. It can't do those kinds of things or get to that level of detail. There is still very much a human element to that whole AI. The other thing that AI cannot do, the chatbots are great, but they get to a point where they've answered all the logical questions. And unfortunately, as humans, we're not always logical. Who is going to calm down the tenant whose lights have all gone out or who's going to calm down the water going everywhere, or talk somebody through that situation? And also apply a little bit of compassion, negotiation, brainstorming when the obvious answers aren't immediately there.
I guess while tenants can put applications in and use ChatGPT nowadays to make you sound better than others, there's some gut feel when you actually see the prospective tenants and have a feeling of, is it right? Do they feel like the right sort of people that are going to look after the property for our clients?
Anyone can tell a good story. And I've just said, knowing the story is important, because the story's got to match up with those facts. Everybody's going to tell you as they're applying for a property that they're the cleanest, most lovely, wonderful people on earth. But we need to see those inspections and do those routines so that we can actually know that that is backed up by action.
So while AI is definitely going to make the jobs of property managers easier in one degree, it's not going to be able to focus on the human side of the job anytime soon. So I think your job's safe for a little while, Leanne. One of the other trends people are hearing about, and I guess they're probably asking you about, is inspection managers. Some agencies use specialized inspectors instead of property managers. I guess they're outsourcing it in some ways because having the right team is expensive. What's your thought about that?
So we've looked at doing it both ways. We've tested doing it both ways. And whilst I agree that if you've got property managers working every Saturday and doing the open for inspections, and you've got them traveling around in the cars, retention, which is a big problem in property management, can be an issue. And equally, it takes them away from being able to respond to emails or answer phone calls or do those kinds of things. There is a balance. What you don't want to get into is having your most experienced, most qualified property manager sitting in the office and providing advice on a property that they've never seen. So, there's also skill levels there. Typically, the inspection managers that are employed have limited experience, are just going out and may not see things that a more experienced property manager would. On the other hand, when you employ an inspection manager who isn't the office junior, who is potentially an experienced property manager or has worked in building and construction and looking for something at the other end of their careers that is perhaps less physical, you do get that specialist care that an experienced inspection manager can bring. So you really want to balance those things as you go through. So I do believe that a hybrid version is probably exactly what you need. And that's exactly the model that we've gone to at Metropole. We actually have inspection managers. The vast majority of them are actually employed directly by us. So they hold full-time positions. So they're going through all of the training, all of the expectations that we have, and they're privy to all of the reports that have gone beforehand. But we've still got the property managers doing the bulk of routine inspections, definitely doing the first open for inspection for any leasing campaign. And that's important for two reasons. First, the relationship with the tenant, either going in or coming out, the opportunity to meet them. And also it's important because they see the consistency of the property over time. Your dedicated inspection manager, though, walks in not knowing whether there was a maintenance item there or not knowing. So they will report sometimes on the detail or everything that they see. Whereas your property manager who knows that dishwasher is going to get replaced or knows that this is happening or that may not pick up on those things. So it gives you that both sides, the knowledge, but also the practicality and the long-term maintenance strategies.
Now, a lot of people know Metropole as wealth strategists, property strategists and buyer's agents, but I hope that our listeners and viewers are able to see that we have a substantial property management department looking after close to $2 billion worth of assets for our clients with offices in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. And we're much more than rent collectors, we're asset managers. Now, if you are an investor or thinking of getting investing and haven't listened to the last podcast I did with Leanne that came out in early October, go back to wherever you're listening or watching this podcast and listen to that because you're going to learn about how property management has changed. I know it's a little bit of a boring topic, but it's actually looking after your multi-million-dollar asset or your $100,000 asset. So wherever you're listening to this, go back to the previous chat I had with Leanne about a month ago where you'll hear where property managers are asset managers. Now, interestingly, Leanne, the daughter of a friend of ours who lives overseas and has been living overseas for a long time, emailed me a couple of weeks ago because they've got a property that they actually gave to a different property manager, interestingly, based on fees. Anyway, that property now there has been damaged, badly damaged. They sent me photos. We're pet-friendly landlords, as you know, but the dogs have scratched the doors. The place is messy. They were trying to get a new tenant and couldn't get a new tenant because the current tenant was creating all sorts of problems and issues. And it actually was a poor decision based on we're going to go with the cheapest property manager. I guess they didn't understand why there is such a wide range of property management fees. And I guess in this world, you get what you pay for. So why is it that some agencies charge 6 and 7%, and I know others around Australia charge 11% of the rental? How would you explain the difference to people who are asking you that question?
Starting at the top level down, you'll find fees for residential management ranging anywhere from 4%, sometimes flat fees, through to about 15%. Now, you
Wow.
typically, exactly. You'll typically find in Western Australia and South Australia, they'll be at the top end of those fee charges. And that's got to do both with the geographical spread of properties, so the size of the territory that they're looking after, but also the complexities in that legislation. So there are higher complexities. So you've got fewer agents, more kilometres to travel, and more routine inspections, more compliance inspections. You've got more to do in terms of management there. So that's why those tend to be higher. But there's still fluctuations within those states. And again, bringing it down a level, as I spoke about, are management platforms out there, which for a flat fee per month or a 3 or 4% management fee, you do the bulk of the work yourself. Problem with that is that, yes, you have control as the owner of the property, but you've also got all of the headaches. And how do you know what it is that you're doing? And how do you know whether that particular item is compliant or not? What is your qualification? How are you going to represent yourself at fee cut? How are you going to address that midnight caller with no power or whatever the situation could be. So there is quite a discrepancy there as you go through. Then you've got your middle of your range property managers, and they're awesome. They're great. But this, for us, at Metropole, we're concentrating on the asset management, the investor management, the investor goals that are behind the property purchase and holding it in a portfolio anyway. So it's really taking it to that next level. It's not just about fixing what the tenant complained about tonight. It's also making sure that we've got maintenance plans that balance where you are. So are we looking to renovate or refurb in the next little bit, in which case we're going to manage maintenance differently? Are we looking, in the case of our developments team, to just baby this property through, still being completely compliant, but getting the property through before we redevelop it? What is the strategy behind the property? And also making sure it actually performs. And there's very few property managers out there that have that backing to be able to say, hey, listen, you haven't looked at your mortgage for the last 2 or 3 years. Let's go have a look at that. Hey, you haven't looked at whether this fits into your portfolio. Where are those vacate dates likely to come? Are you being exposed? And that's exactly why you need a strategist. And that's one of the complementary services that happen, and one of the way that our property managers are trained and interact with our strategists and with our developments team to make sure that we're across all of those aspects as well. That's obviously at the top end. That's really taking property management from rent collecting all the way through to actually strategic investment management.
Well, I guess that's part of the reason the lady I was speaking about a little while ago who's living overseas, Claire, she didn't even question what our property management fees were. They wanted somebody to look after their asset with care and swapped over now to using our services. And actually, while they may have saved a little bit in property management fees over the last, I think it was 2 years that the tenant was in there, it cost them a fortune to repair the property. Some of those things weren't able to be covered under fair wear and tear, and the lease bond didn't cover it. So I guess what you're saying is it's a bit like babysitting. You pay somebody to keep your kids fed, for somebody to nurture them. So property management for Metropole is a serious part of the business, while for a lot of estate agencies, property management is not a profitable side of the business. They keep the properties in their rent roll, as it's called, because they love it when their tenants, their landlords, I should say, sell up, because that actually gives them the listing for the next sale. While for us, property management, which Pam set up 25 years ago now almost, is the backbone of how we look after our clients in the long term. So let's not look for the cheapest option. I think what you're telling us is, what level of service are you needing? Are you wanting? Are you expecting? And will it be able to keep up to date with all the changes in legislation? So Leanne, thanks for walking us through these frequently asked questions. It's clear property management today isn't just about collecting rents. It's about strategy, relationships, and making smart long-term decisions. And if you're keen to get some thoughts from Leanne and her team about property management, go to metropole.com.au, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. And of course, if you're wanting to get into property investment, the property market's moving ahead, but it's not too late. It's still at the early stage of this new property super cycle. Click a link in the show notes and go to metropole.com.au and have a wealth discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists just to discuss your options. Leanne, thank you for coming on again. And for those of you listening to this, if you've got some benefit from this and you're not currently subscribed or following this, depending upon which podcast app you're listening to, they have different words. Please do this each or twice a week. You're going to hear from the thoughts from my expert guests. And if you know somebody who is a property investor and would benefit from Leanne's input on property management, there's a share button on every podcast app or on YouTube. Just share it. Tell somebody about the Michael Yardney podcast. It's the only thing I ask of you in return for us giving you this information. Leanne, thanks once again. Look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, we catch up all the time. I'm actually about to, after we turn off the record, come into the office, and I'll see you there anyway, but we'll catch up on the podcast.
Thank you.
In a moment, I'm going to share with you my popular mindset message. But beforehand, it's the weekly trivia question, where I ask you a question and you can leave an answer at propertytrivia.com.au. Every week, 3 people get a hard copy, real copy of one of my best-selling property books. And everyone gets an updated report, one I've just updated, about what's ahead for property in the next year or so. By the way, if you're listening to a slightly older episode, don't worry, your entry still counts. So today's question is simple. I want to make it easy for you to get that report in the book. The question is true or false. Homeowners in Australia pay capital gains tax when they sell their principal place of residence. True or false, homeowners in Australia pay capital gains tax when they sell their principal place of residence. Now, I know there are some exemptions and other issues, but simple answer. Go to propertytrivia.com.au, leave us your answer, get your report and a chance to win a book.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I want to share with you the concept that you should put your ladder on your wall. You see, most of us do what we're told. Now, this habit forms early in life. Our parents, for our own good, make us do things we don't want to do, wake up early for school, eat broccoli, do homework, do house chores. Doing what we're told is conditioned into us from the very beginning, but then we become adults, and this metamorphosis begins at about the age of, 14 or so, and continues until the age of 25, when the prefrontal cortex in your brain matures. Smart parents begin handing over decision-making to their children during this metamorphosis stage. They encourage their children to take individual responsibility. They let them make mistakes. They allow them to experiment. They allow them to fail. They stand ready to offer advice and direction. Unfortunately, though, parents like this seem to be in the minority. Most parents hover over their children, insulating them from life and imposing their will over their lives, the lives of their children, often well into their 20s. And this prevents children from becoming independent thinkers and independent doers. As a result, most young adults wind up pursuing goals and dreams that their parents have told them. I know I did that. Most put their ladders on their parents' wall and spend much of their life climbing that ladder. At some point, they come to the realization that they're unhappy doing what they're doing. This leads to a feeling of despondency about the work they do, or maybe even the life they're living. And this unhappiness usually begins to manifest in the late 30s at a point at which they've even got children of their own and maybe a house and a mortgage. This despondency sets in when they realize they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They must continue to climb the ladder that they've put up on their parents' wall in order to meet the financial demands they've now got in their life. So how do you break free? How can you take your ladder off your parents' wall and move it onto your wall? I guess you must have a, excuse the expression, come to Jesus moment with yourself. What you would like to do with your ideal life in the future, in say 10 years' time. So I suggest if you're in this situation or you know somebody who is, let them know about this, take out a piece of paper and write down exactly what you'd like your ideal life to look like. Now, of course, you can do it on a computer, but it's apparently better for your brain if you write and use your hand and embed inside this note about what you'd like your ideal life to look like in 10 years' time. Embed in it your narrative about the ideal life, what your dreams are, what's got to be realized in order for that to become a reality. Then, next, take baby steps in pursuit of each one of those dreams along the way to your ideal life. And I think you should set aside 20 minutes every day pursuing just one of those dreams. And doing that will help build momentum. Eventually, the momentum will accelerate and you'll find yourself soon lost in the pursuit of your dreams and goals. You're going to look for the goals behind those dreams. So I want you to, step by step, put the ladder against your wall. Once you get going, you're going to realize your passion's going to take over. It's going to energize you. Eventually, one by one, you're going to be able to realize those dreams. And as you do, you're going to climb higher up your own ladder, closer to the top of your wall. The greatest part of pursuing your dreams is that you can feel happier, enthusiastic about life. So my advice to you is if you are in this situation, don't wallow in self-pity because you don't like what you're doing for a living. Take action. Put your ladder on your wall and start climbing it every day. Take action today. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. But before you move on to the next podcast you're going to listen to, let me remind you I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher. We call that Demographics Decoded, where Simon and I unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. In my mind, this is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, but also for business people and entrepreneurs. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, just please stop for a second and subscribe on your podcast app where you're listening to this or on YouTube. And of course, if you don't subscribe to this show, the Michael Yardney Podcast, why not click the link that says follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. So twice a week, you're going to get benefit from my guests and me. And I'd like to ask you a little favour, please. If you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody who would also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney Podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Well, just tell them about it. Just have a chat with them. Now, I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing me a favour in my quest to help as many people as possible to become financially literate. And by the way, I've got a special bonus for you. As my way of saying thank you for subscribing, just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. It's just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember, the information that we give you in this podcast is general information, not specific information about your personal circumstances, because we don't know about them. But if you do want specific information, you can always have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. If you really want to learn more, you can always listen to the previous podcast, the many episodes we've already published. Just go back to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success, and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney Podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?